Chapter 7 of The Magic Nuts by Mary Louisa Molesworth. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Anne Fletcher. Chapter 7. A collation under difficulties. D'une façon fort civile. Le rat de ville et le rat des champs. They were at the opposite side of the garden from that by which they had entered it, and just before them was a large white tent. A faint sound reached them, a rustle and murmur, as of people moving about busily, but not of voices. The tent appeared closed, but as they went nearer, they saw that there were doors or flaps in the stuff it was made of, which could be opened either from within or without. Hildegard turned to Leonore. "We may as well go in," she said. "We weren't told not to, and we want to see all we can." Leonore was looking a little frightened again. "We can't knock," she said. "There's nothing to knock on. And we can't ring. There's no bell." "So the only thing is to walk in," said Hildegard. She drew aside the first flap they came to, and both entered. It was a busy scene. There was a table right round the tent, and at it gnomes were working actively. A moment's glance sufficed to show that they were packing, for queer-shaped boxes and baskets stood about, and quantities of moss. For a minute or so no one seemed to notice the visitors. These gnomes were evidently not of the young and giddy class. They did not seem to be speaking to each other at all. The children drew still closer to the table. The gnome nearest to them was laying a bright scarlet flower, in shape like a large pitcher with half a dozen small jugs hanging round it, in a basket well filled with moss. He glanced at the newcomers. "If you please," said Hildegard, "are you packing flowers?"
"You can see that for yourself," was the reply.
"Oh, yes," she agreed, "but we would like to know why you are doing it. I mean, where are all the packages to be sent to, and what for?"
"Who sent you down here?"
asked the gnome. "The spinning-wheel fairy," Hildegard replied. The gnome's manner became more cordial.
Well then," he said, "I don't mind explaining things a little. She wouldn't send idle folk to tease us. She's always busy herself. We are packing pattern flowers. Our artists design them, and our most skilful metal workers make them, and then we send them up to be copied again."
"Up to our world, do you mean?" asked Leonore. "I didn't know we had so many new patterns of flowers." The gnome shook his head.
"You don't," he said. "Only a very few find their way to the place you come from. We send them first to the flower fairies, and they copy them in common stuff like what all your flowers up there are made of," with a tone of contempt. "And then they send them off again, seeds or roots, whichever they think best. And that's how new flowers start."
"But where do they send them to?" asked Hildegard curiously. "You say not many come to our world."
"That's not my business," he replied. "Your world isn't the only one. You can ask the flower fairies if ever you pass their way. Now, I must get on with my work. If you cross the tent, you'll see the toy packers at the other side."
The children's eyes sparkled. "Toys," they repeated. "Do you make toys down here?" The gnome nodded.
"That's our principal dealing with your world," he said. "You don't mean to say you thought all the toys your shops are full of are made by clumsy human fingers? You should see our toy factory about Christmas time. Santa Claus has a time of it choosing and settling, I can tell you."
Hildegard and Leonore were breathless with eagerness. "Oh, how interesting!" they exclaimed. "Mayn't we see the toy factory? Oh, do tell us which way to go to get to it." But to their disappointment the little packer shook his head.
"Can't be done," he said. "Doors are closed to all visitors for 6 months before Christmas. That's the arrangement with Santa Claus. It would never do for it to leak out about the new inventions before the time. You can see some of the regular toys over there where they're packing, for even on them we're always improving."
The children saw that it was no use persisting, for there was something very decided about the gnome's manner, even when they were the most amiable, and the small man was busily at work again. So they made their way quietly to the other side of the tent. There they saw displayed, waiting to be packed, a good many toys they had often seen before, and some not so familiar. There were queer little doll gnomes, or groups of them for ornaments, not very like those the children had seen alive in one way, for as a rule the living gnomes were grave and pompous, and the figures were represented as laughing and rollicking.
"They must be taken from the young gnomes, the ones who are only 200 or 300 years old," said Leonore, smiling. "Oh, Hildegard, do look at that dollhouse furniture half packed over there. Isn't it too lovely? I've often wondered, haven't you, how people's fingers could make such tiny things, but now I understand. Oh, I do wish we could have seen the toy manufactory."
But it was no use wishing. None of the packers took much notice of them, so they thought it as well to pass out of the tent, trusting that somehow or other they would find their way home, for they were sure that the spinning-wheel fairy would not forget them. And in this they were right. A straight path between the rocks was before them as they came out of the tent, so there was no question of which way to go. They ran on fearlessly for some distance, till the passage they were following suddenly emerged into a large square, or round rather, on all sides of which stood tiny little houses, each exactly like its neighbours, with a door in the middle and a window at both sides, and at every doorway appeared a little gnome woman with a gnome baby in her arms. You never saw anything so funny. Hildegard and Leonore stopped short in astonishment. They could scarcely help bursting out laughing, the whole scene was so comical.
"This must be the gnome village," said Hildegard in a low voice. "I wonder how old these babies are.
50 or 60, perhaps." Before Leonore had time to reply, one of the little women stepped forward. She curtsied very politely, and when she spoke, her voice, though rather squeaky, was meek and gentle. It was evident that the Mrs. Gnomes were kept in good order by their lords and masters.
"We have received a message to tell us you would be honouring us with a visit," she said, "and we have prepared a little collation for you. May I ask you to step inside?"
She pointed as she spoke to the door of her own little house, and the children turned to follow her. But alack and alas, with all the good-will in the world they could not have availed themselves of the good lady's invitation. The door of the cottage was not as high as their waists, and even if they had crept in, they couldn't possibly have stood or even crouched inside. It would have been a tighter fit than in a fair-sized dog-kennel. "Oh, I'm very sorry," began Hildegard, but she was interrupted by a burst of wailing. All the little women had rushed forward, each clutching her baby, and all the babies roared too, rubbing their fists in their eyes and looking more grotesquely gnome-like, as indeed they had a good right to do, than ever.
"Oh dear," sobbed the little women. "What shall we do? We never thought of our houses being too small for the gracious ladies, and our masters will be so angry if they find the collation has not been partaken of, for they sent strict orders by an electric bird."
"An electric bird?" repeated the children, very much interested. "Do let us see it." But the gnome lady nearest them shook her head.
"Oh, it's gone back again," she said, "and it flies so fast you couldn't see it. It just whistles a message. Oh, it's quite a common thing. Oh dear, what shall we do about the collation?"
And at her words all the other little women started wringing their hands again, while the babies screamed. Hildegard looked as if she didn't know whether to laugh or to pity them, but Leonore felt very sorry for them. Then a brilliant thought struck her. "Supposing you carry it out here," she said, "to the middle of the square, the collation, I mean. We could sit down on the ground and eat it quite comfortably." And indeed, as far as the quantity was concerned, there was not likely to be any difficulty. "If they've planned it according to their own size," Leonore whispered to Hildegard, "we could eat it all up like a doll's feast in half a minute." "Yes," Hildegard replied in the same tone, "I only hope it is something we can eat, not roasted flies or anything like that." The little women had seized Leonore's suggestion with delight, and were now busily employed in carrying out the feast. They first placed a table, a huge table they evidently thought it, though it was only about 2 feet long, in the middle of the square, and then carried out the dishes, of which the little girls were glad to see there were not, after all, above half a dozen. Then the gnome lady who had first spoken to them seated herself at one end, and Hildegard and Leonore took their places on the ground at each side, the crowd of little women rushing about to wait upon them, tucking their babies under one arm in an original fashion of their own.
"And what may I have the pleasure of helping you to first?" said the small hostess.
She had now quite recovered her spirits, and spoke in a very elegant manner, moving her hands airily over the dishes, having plumped down her baby on the ground beside her, where it lay quite contentedly sucking its thumbs. "Oh, thank you," said Hildegard. "Please give us anything you like." "It's a little difficult to choose, you see," said Leonore, who felt quite at ease with the gnome ladies, "as we do not know what the things are, though," she added quickly, "they look very nice." The small woman looked rather disappointed.
"They shouldn't be strange to you," she said. "They are all, or nearly all, made of our upper world supplies, as we thought you would prefer them. The dish before you contains blackberries with just a touch of pine cone flavouring. The one opposite is wild honey. We deal regularly with the bees through the flower fairies, who understand their language. Then these are cakes of acorn flour, and the jelly at the other side is a special recipe of our own, made from the moss which grows thickly where the streamlets trickle down from the upper world."
"Oh, thank you," said Hildegard again. "May I have some blackberries? It's very late for them, isn't it?" Their hostess shook her head.
"Oh, they're not freshly gathered," she said, "but they are just as good. Nothing ever gets stale in our rock larders."
"How very convenient," said Hildegard, as she tasted the blackberries. They were not bad, although they had a curious aromatic flavour, but after all it didn't much matter, as one good-sized teaspoon would have held all her helping. Leonore had chosen a tiny cake and honey, and then their hospitable friend insisted on both children tasting every other dish on the table, which they had to do, though in 1 or 2 cases they tried to hide how very little they took. The moss jelly was decidedly peculiar.
"Aren't you going to eat anything yourselves?" Leonore inquired.
The gnome ladies gave a wail of disapproval. Such a thing was quite contrary to their ideas of good manners.
"Oh, never, never would we be so rude," they said,
and the children, remembering the fairy's warning, said no more on this point, for fear of offending even these meek little women. But they felt very curious to hear more of the ways and customs of their underground friends.
"Do you have all you eat sent down from our country or from fairyland?"
asked Leonore in a very polite tone.
"Oh dear, no," was the reply. "Just occasionally. We have plenty of supplies of our own."
"Oh, do tell us what," said Hildegard. Their hostess hesitated a little.
"You might not appreciate our national dishes," she said. "We're very fond of stewed frogs, and find them most nourishing, and a good fat toad makes an excellent dish."
Even politeness could not keep back an exclamation of horror from the visitors, though they tried to smother it. "Oh!" said Hildegard with a shiver. "Oh!" said Leonore. But Hildegard went on speaking so quickly that it is to be hoped the gnome ladies did not hear the "ohs." "I think," she said, getting up from the ground as she spoke, "I think we must be going. Don't you, Leonore?" "Oh, yes," said Leonore eagerly. "I'm sure we must." And when they were alone together, each owned to the other that she felt as if there must be toads and frogs all about. "We thank you very much for your kindness," they went on, "and please tell the gentleman that the collation was excellent, and we should like to know the nearest way home, if you will kindly show it to us." The little lady gnome got up from her seat and curtsied graciously. So did all the others, though the effect in their case was a little spoilt by the tucked-in baby gnome under each arm. Apparently the lady who had done the honours of the feast was the only one to whom it was permitted to deposit her baby on the floor. She waved her hand towards the opposite side of the square or circle of houses.
"You'll have no difficulty in finding your way," she said. "All arrangements have been made."
She did not press them to stay longer, so they bowed in return, most politely, of course, and went off in the direction pointed out. "Perhaps," said Leonore, "they're afraid of the gnome gentleman coming home to supper and scolding them for having the collation outside. I shouldn't like to be a gnome lady." "Oh, nor should I," Hildegard agreed. "Certainly the collation could not have been indoors. But I should have liked to peep into the houses, wouldn't you, Leonore? And I almost think I should have liked to pick up one of the gnome babies, though they are rather froggy." Leonore shuddered. "Don't speak of frogs or toads," she said, and she hastened on more rapidly. "Oh, do let us get away quickly," she added. "I've got such a feeling that we shall be treading on some." Hildegard laughed at her. "Oh, nonsense," she said. "They couldn't live on this dry gravel or sand or whatever it is. I expect the gnomes find them where the little streams trickle down. Oh, Leonore, I do hope we shall find our way. This path looks just exactly like the one we came in by." And so it did. But they had not far to go before all misgivings were set at rest by the unexpected appearance of a very fine grey donkey standing on the path before them. He was handsomely caparisoned, and a pannier hung at each side, large enough for a child of our little girl's size to sit in comfortably. And if any doubt remained in their minds as to what they were meant to do, it was soon put to flight, for as they came close up to the donkey, they saw that one pannier was labelled Hildegard and the other Leonore. "Oh, what fun!" they exclaimed. "Oh, what nice arrangements the gnomes make! This time they have not forgotten how big we are. What a beautiful donkey!" A very quiet donkey, too, apparently. He stood perfectly still while the little girls mounted into their places, which was all very well, but he showed no signs of moving after they were settled either, though they shook the reins and begged him to gee up. Suddenly Hildegard turned to Leonore. "Leonore," she said, "I don't believe he's a live donkey. Feel him. He's quite cold. He's like the magic horse in the Arabian Nights, who moved by a spring. How can we find out how to make him go?" They had no need to do so, after all. Almost before Hildegard finished speaking, a short, shrill whistle was heard, and off the same instant started the donkey. Up, I should say, rather than off, for greatly to the children's astonishment they felt themselves rising from the ground. Up, up, up they went, the light growing gradually dimmer and dimmer, till but for a round spot which gradually appeared white high above them, they would have been in total darkness. "Hildegard," whispered Leonore, "are you frightened? It's a nice feeling, going up so fast, isn't it? But I wonder where we're going to." The star of white light overhead grew larger. They became able to distinguish that they were in a kind of shaft. It was not cold or uncomfortable in any way, and the panniers in which they sat were easily cushioned. "I believe," began Hildegard, but she did not finish her sentence. There came another whistle, softer and longer than the first, and something, was it a gentle hand or the touch of a bird's feathered wing, they couldn't tell, made both the little girls close their eyes for a moment. And when they opened them again, where were they? End of chapter 7.